بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله وكفاه والصلاة والسلام على رسوله المصطفى وعلى عباده الذين ارتضى ومن بهداهم اهتدى وبآثار أهل المدينة اقتفى وبعد فسلام الله عليكم. Welcome back. أهلا وسهلا بكم to this session of Al-Andalus from Rise to Fall. We will concentrate today on the Dawla, the dynasty of the Muwaḥḥidīn. The theme, I've kind of given it the name Al-Muwaḥḥid, belief, power and vision. Also kind of said all good things come to an end. Give us a sense of direction where we're perhaps going. What we aim to cover today, bi'idhnillah, is we'll continue from where we left off. If you remember, we kind of ended with the collapse of the Dawlatul Murabitin, the Murabit or Al-Muravid dynasty, and the rise of the Muwaḥḥidīn. And we see Muhammad ibn Tumart and his student Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali, people we learnt about in the previous session, really coming to the forefront and laying the foundations for this dynasty. Today we will focus on things like tyranny versus theology, which is just showing us mindsets within this personality of Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali al-Gumi and what's so special about him. We will then follow him right through and the successes that come after him that kind of pave the way further and stabilize or really take this dynasty to greater heights and ensure stability and success for the Muwaḥḥidīn. We will look at people like Yaqub al-Mansur, who was he, and this era which is described as the golden era of the Muwaḥḥid. We'll touch up on this topic of a dream of unity, unifying the Muslim Ummah, and this dream, and have a brief discussion on that, and succession in general. We'll look at that, filling the shoes of the forefathers, and how that is not perhaps as easy as we have seen historically, and we will perhaps see history repeat itself. That's something. We will also see the rise of Castile and its conviction. And I mean by its conviction, its type of attitude and determination. And then we will return to what will be perhaps an element of deja vu. And are we not learning from history? And I don't mean by we as in just we, although it is aimed at us, but I'm referring to also people in history. Were they not reflecting upon history? We will then find ourselves looking at the Muslim world around North Africa and the Iberian Peninsula as a fragmented one. We will start to see the sun beginning to set on much of really was known to be the adornment almost of Muslim civilization, places amongst which are Cordoba. We will see that finally crushed, and how much of Al-Andalus follows in this avalanche of Christian assaults from the north. And whilst going through these type of themes, we will also inshallah reflect upon what were certain factors which contributed to success, and likewise opposing factors which led to failure. That said, دعنا نبدأ. If you remember, we had kind of ended the previous session looking at certain battles and certain clashes that took place between Muhammad ibn Tumart and his followers, who had now risen to several tens of thousands, and against the Murabitin. And we know that Muhammad ibn Tumart began his da'wah openly in 512 Hijri. We know that he was somebody that had returned from several years of study, and he was actually an outstanding scholar. That is something which really shouldn't be denied, because he was. And he, although once he began his da'wah openly, he did begin to bring in elements of heresy which really went from bad to worse. So he eventually ends up with the da'wah that he calls for this isma, for this infallibility, that he is incapable of error. He cannot make any mistakes. He is ma'soom. And that he is the Mahdi, and becomes known as al-Mahdi ibn Tumart. He has many followers, and he displays this sense of callous and harsh behavior towards people. We know that he is extremely pious, if that's how we wanna describe him with those words, in his appearance, in his attitude towards ibadah. We know that he would beat his followers if he found out that they missed the Hajjud. So this type of attitude becomes prevalent, really. He begins to do things like takfir of the authorities around him, the Murabitin and key figures of authority, and by that we mean declaring them kuffar, and thereby dehumanizing them and saying that it was necessary to have them killed and removed. There is a battle in the year 524 Hijri known as Buhaira, in which the Muwaḥḥidīn suffer a tremendous loss. There are about 40,000 Muwaḥḥidīn that almost die. And although the Murabitin did win the battle, but perhaps unknown to them at the time, they most certainly had not won the war. In that same year, Muhammad ibn Tumart dies, but before dying, he selects his heir to be Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali, who was a Berber that had come from the Zanata tribe and the fraction of al-Gumi. So he was known as al-Gumi, but he was from the Zanata tribe, which was not the Masmudi tribe that Ibn Tumart and many of his followers came from. And many people say that was done selectively. So Ibn Tumart did that in order to bring a neutral person to the forefront. We also know that during Ibn Tumart's rule and reign, he had favored Abdul Mu'min tremendously. He was amongst his key people, in addition to somebody else also known as al-Bashir al-Wansharisi, was also somebody that was really close to him, and a few others also. Now, when Muhammad ibn Tumart dies, Abdul Mu'min now takes over, but the difference is that Abdul Mu'min really believes deep down that he will bring about change. And I don't mean by that Muhammad ibn Tumart never had that conviction, but the difference is that, you see, sometimes a little word or some words can take a person a very long way. Now, something that Muhammad ibn Tumart did do during his lifetime was that when Abdul Mu'min came to him, and he originally came to him just to study, he was infatuated with his knowledge. He tells Abdul Mu'min that you will become a very great person in history. And he tells him that great dynasties will crumble at your hand, that you will reign over a huge and unprecedented dynasty. These words hit the heart of Abdul Mu'min like lightning. They change the way he thinks. They take just faith to the level of sheer conviction. Now, Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali is described by people, including Imam al-Zahabi, as somebody who would constantly, daily be involved and engaged with his ibadah. He had a reasonable portion of the Quran which he recited every day. He was somebody that would maintain his weekly fast every Monday and Thursday. He was somebody that was engaged in seeking knowledge, as we know from the very onset. He was somebody that in his day and age would oppose wearing silk, because that had become almost quite common, but not for him. Now, we know he was somebody that was opposed to several munkarat, wrongdoings, and he would enjoin the good. However, despite all of these type of good qualities about him, he was somebody that they say was one of the people, of the commoners, that he would give in charity where necessary, that he would visit the sick where he came to know of that. But yet, despite that, they say, وَكَانَ سَفَّاكًا لِلدِّمَاء, that he was somebody that would easily, without batting an eyelid, shed blood. And we see this once again being taught, we see the signs of his teachers' teachings upon him. Because Muhammad ibn Tumurt was also somebody that would easily shed blood. If he found that anybody opposed his theology, he would have them killed. I mean, without any questions being asked. That was not a problem whatsoever for him. And likewise, we see that he also, Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali, follows in those footsteps. We know that there were incidents when his teacher, just to show you how severe he was, that once when they won a particular battle and had taken the spoils of war, an argument began amongst the people, and in order to kind of extinguish the argument, Muhammad ibn Tumurt set fire to the ghanima, to the ghanaim, to the spoils of war. Ya salam. In order to show people that we do not want this love of the dunya in our heart. Now that is, I suppose, a powerful message being delivered, but it is not the methodology of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ did not treat people in such a way. He did not deal with ghanima in such a way. He did not see when people made mistakes that they should be punished with such harsh or callous responses. Now, one thing about Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali was that he was not a believer of some of the heresies that Muhammad ibn Tumurt had presented. So he was not really convinced, and he didn't believe in the isma, in the fact that Muhammad ibn Tumurt was the Mahdi, or that he was ma'soom, or so on. These type of heresies he did not believe in, although he didn't openly denounce them either. And the reason being was that perhaps he needed the time to establish himself. Now, some people say, amongst them Ibn Khaldun, that after Ibn Tumurt had died, that Abdul Mu'min kept his death almost a secret for perhaps 1 to 2 years, whilst he stabilized the state for himself. Allahu A'lam, but that has also been transmitted. But back to the Iberian Peninsula. Now, Marrakesh had been conquered in 541 Hijri, and the Murabitin had been formally and officially brought to an end. Now, whilst this was happening, there was huge turmoil, as you can imagine. There was turbulence. Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali stabilizing North Africa, especially the capital Marrakesh and other cities which follow. Now, whilst this is going on, in the months that follow, in the Iberian Peninsula, the Christians seize the opportunity and seize it and land upon Almeria with a naval attack and manage to conquer Almeria. They then follow in the following year by taking over Tortosa in 543. Then Larda. Portugal, the king of Portugal, Ibn Rink, if you remember, begins to expand his empire. He also sees that this is the ideal opportunity to seek help from other fellow Christians and Christian navies who would be passing through perhaps the Mediterranean. And amongst them were the French navy, and also the English navy is going through at the time, and he sends messages, asks for their help, and they agree to help him, and then using their help he lands and begins to expand certain parts, once again stabilizing Lisbona, Lisbon and other places, and expanding the Portugal and the Portuguese kingdom. Whilst this is going on, in 544 the Christians now, so 3 years since the collapse of the Murabitin, and with the Murabitin having collapsed, the Iberian Peninsula was the least of its priority. So the Christians now, having in Andalus, having taken over these different towns and states and cities, find the courage within themselves to actually attack North Africa, and they take over parts of Tunis. Meanwhile, Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali establishes several large artillery depots. He is really committed to ensuring that the army of North Africa, of especially the Maghrib, which would be modern day Morocco and Algeria, these regions are well fortified. It is said that he would often himself go about each of the different barracks and engage with the soldiers personally and see that they are up to military strength. He would test them. He continues to enlist soldiers. His army becomes very powerful. He begins to include several of the tribes. Most, if not almost all the people within North Africa, especially within the Maghrib, had now given their allegiance to Abdul Mu'min. So all of this is taking place to the extent, let me show you how powerful he becomes, people, that it is documented that he actually knocks down the walls of Marrakesh. He destroys them. And if you remember, these walls were actually, some of them were fortified and rebuilt, especially upon the request of Ibn Rushd, who had come to Ali ibn Yusuf ibn Tashfin with certain requests, and amongst them were that the walls of several Muslim cities be fortified, amongst them Marrakesh. Now, he actually destroys the wall, meaning that the city is now bare. And he says, Siwaruna siyufuna. He says, our swords are our walls. Whosoever wills, let them come and attack us. Allahu Akbar. لو كنت الحديد لكسروني ولكني أشد من الحديد. The poet says, if I was made out of metal, they would have crushed me. But I am stronger than metal. And this really shows the type of confidence and strength that is being displayed by this ruler. Okay, just trying to get into his mindset of how powerful he had become. Now, whilst all this is going on, Andalus is actually in a total state, because people there are absolutely petrified with what's going on. They're all worried about the rise in the Christian confidence to attack and take over Muslim cities, that Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, the Don from Seville, the Maliki legend, travels over into the Maghrib. And he comes to Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali and he gives him bay'ah on behalf of several of the people of Al-Andalus, and he asks for his help. Allahu Akbar. And it's quite poetic in a way almost, that why Qadi Abu Bakr ibn Arabi, he was the same person and his father who were used as envoys to the east by the Murabitin, by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, when he sent them as a messenger to the Abbasi Khalifa to annex the Murabitin kingdom to that of the Abbasi. So in order to kind of combine, although that didn't fully materialize because Yusuf ibn Tashfin then died and things began to change and so on, but this dream of unifying, the person sent as the messenger, and the Abbasis did accept, by the way, they accepted that this thing, and the dua did begin for the Abbasi Khalifas upon the Manabir and the Mimbars and so on within the Murabitin kingdom. So all of this took place and was facilitated by Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi. And yes, the Murabitin are then eliminated by the Muwaḥḥidīn, and who is it that comes for the bay'ah? It's no other than Qadi Abu Bakr ibn al-Arabi, the legend himself. And he asks for help. And Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali agrees to that. He comes and he crosses over, and that in 543 he agrees to help. He crosses over. Within the next few years, by 552 Hijri, Almeria is restored to the Muslim sovereignty. Tunis, in the following 2-3 years, where the Christians had attacked and taken over certain parts, is restored. Libya is now stabilized and brought and annexed to the Muwaḥḥidīn dynasty. Now, whilst this is going on, at this point, really around 558 Hijri, Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali dies and chooses his successor, Yusuf ibn Abdul Mu'min, his son. And he had several children, and amongst them he chooses Yusuf, who at the time was 22 years of age, somebody who they say was very also steadfast in his military conquest, in his jihad, that he was somebody that was known to have firm determination and be resolute in his affairs. He continues this legacy of his father. He marches into the Iberian Peninsula and further stabilizes several regions. They do say there was, from amongst his downfalls, if you like, or what he's critiqued about, is that his rule was very dictatorial, in the sense that he would not, that they say that kan la yushawiru ahadan, that he wasn't somebody that would seek advice from other people, that he would very isolated in his rule, that he didn't want to know the opinions of others. And this really is a huge problem, because in 580 Hijri, he continues to expand his military campaign into Portugal, and there's a particular fort for which he is fighting, and many of the ulama advised him and the umara, the leaders, that look, this fort is way too fortified, and there is no point in trying to take this over. You need to concentrate on the other places. But despite all this advice being given to him, he still kind of turns away and actually meets his fate at that fort and dies in 580 Hijri. Now his son is somebody by the name of Yaqub al-Mansur, which means the victorious. And Yaqub Abu Yusuf, that's his kunya, seizes power at the age of 25 and continues to rule until 595 Hijri. That's 15 years of reign and rule, in which they say he was a man who was committed and devoted to jihad and to his campaign. That he was a man of the deen. He was somebody that would lead, establish, not only ensure that the basics of the deen are established, like the salawat, but that he would lead in them. He would actually lead the salah himself. He was somebody that would oversee many judicial issues himself. He would establish the hudud and have people punished, and on several occasions members of his own family were punished. He was somebody that during his time he facilitated debt alleviation, that he would help members of the public personally, that he would go about, and if he met somebody he would ask them what problems they had and see to their problems. That in his time the kingdom begins to expand, or the dynasty begins to really take over so massively and so dramatically that it's mind-boggling. So many towns, cities, regions, countries become annexed to the Muwaḥḥidīn kingdom and dynasty. The Almohad dynasty reaches its peak of rule and leadership. It is the golden era for the Muwaḥḥidīn dynasty. He himself establishes the city Rabat, which is in modern day Morocco, which he names Rabat al-Fath. They say that he himself would every Friday go out and visit the ill, that he had set up several hospitals and major hospitals for the ill that would cater for them for free. And not only that, he had an endowment set aside that was a waqf for the medicine of those ill people. So not only that they're being treated whilst they're there, but those who were outpatients, if you like, that those that would just come and need to buy medicine from different places, he had a waqf set about for them, a welfare system that would purchase their medication. He was the first of the Muwahhid rulers to openly denounce the Mahdi's theology. That he denounced that the Mahdi or Muhammad ibn Tumurt was the Mahdi. He did that openly. He denounced that he was ma'asum, and he said that nobody is ma'asum except the Anbiya, and he openly said this. He was somebody that was known to have memorized the Quran and several ahadith. During his time, he is known for his type of onslaught against the fiqh tradition, which in his part of the world was the Maliki madhab. So during his time, unfortunately, several books of the Maliki madhab are burnt, which really is a shame, a huge loss to this ummah at the hands of this Caliph or this Amir at the very least. And he, in its place, enforces that judgment be given only by Quran and Sunnah. He was somebody that pretty much openly took to the madhab of Ibn Hazm, a textualist madhab, a Zahiri school of thought, that he kind of instated several judges only if they would agree to judge in such a way. And subhanAllah, it is, as you can imagine, immensely difficult. That in his time you start to see several books. In fact, he had certain books compiled which had 10 different books of hadith in one. So it included the Sihah Sitt, included the Muwatta, included several others as well. And now amongst all of these, he then put that together, and that was the book of fiqh, if you like. But the problem is that with hadith, it does not mention everyday type of disputes necessarily. It does not exhaust them. So you will actually through history find that many of these qudat, of these judges, would actually keep a type of secret scholar, if you like, that was a Maliki judge that they would resort to and often pay at times to give them the ruling for their cases. And then they would go and enforce these cases because it was impossible to just rule the way he wanted people to rule. And as I mentioned, that it was a huge detriment also that the loss of several Maliki type of works and manuscripts that were available, some which perhaps disappeared forever during his time. And it was during his reign that also the ulama like Ibn Rushd al-Hafid, the philosopher, were about. And he actually took a very positive liking to Ibn Rushd, and he on many occasions kind of favored him and protected him, unlike what the fate that Ibn Rushd continues to face after Yaqub al-Mansur. So it's quite interesting, and it was his time that Abu Bakr ibn Zahr, the famous physician and scholar, was about, and several other philosophers and ulama were around in his time. And he was somebody that was really fascinated with ilm, Yaqub al-Mansur. And they say that he restored stability to the Muslim world, that his empire spread far and wide, much further south into Central Africa than it had in the time of the Murabitun. And it went north once again quite powerfully in the Iberian Peninsula. They say that he himself would lead the battle on many occasions. They would personally take place, that he would take part. Now, in 585 Hijri, there is a rebellion in East Andalus by Bani Ghania. And Bani Ghania are really the remnants of the Murabitin dynasty. They are people that were originally part of the Murabitin that had then kind of succumbed to the Mohad, the Muwaḥḥidīn, and now in the year 585 they declare their independence again. They do manage to they rebel in Eastern Andalus, and they manage to take over the Balearic Islands, which includes places like Mallorca and so on. And they also span further south into Tunis, taking over parts of Tunis as well. Now, with this happening, obviously a certain amount of turbulence spreads and kind of seizes, if you like, the Iberian Peninsula. The King of Portugal sees this as an opportunity and seizes it once again and begins to raid several cities, including Seville. He reaches up until Seville, which is a huge and powerful city of the Muslims in Al-Andalus. Now, so with all this going on, Yaqub al-Mansur decides to cross over into the Iberian Peninsula. He sees that the threat is really from two sides, from Castile and from Portugal. And at the time, the Portuguese dynasty seems to be the more powerful one. So Yaqub al-Mansur strikes a treaty with Castile for 10 years. That they will have a truce and they will have peace. Now, with that treaty being signed, he then concentrates his forces towards the Portuguese dynasty and kingdom, and he attacks and defeats the Portuguese on several fronts. Whilst this is happening, the King of Castile breaks his treaty, who is, by the way, Alfonso VIII, who is an offspring of Alfonso VI. He breaks his treaty and kind of sends this letter to Yaqub al-Mansur saying, who do you think you are, and we've had enough of you, and blah, 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 and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that. and this and that, and this treaty never meant anything. Now, Yaqub al-Mansur, they say, upon receiving it and reading it, tears it up, and then a small part of that letter he actually gets, flips, and writes on the back that he says that I will bring to you an army. That he says that la qibala lakum biha, that you will have no such an army. With such an army I will descend upon you that you will not know what he. And he leaves it to that. And then he begins to prepare his army. And he gathers several thousands of people. And he uses this letter, this torn letter of Alfonso VIII, to be kind of replicated and read out on several mimbars throughout the Muslim world, or especially throughout the Western Muslim world, and which kind of rallies the emotions of the believers who now hear what Alfonso VIII is saying, and it kind of incites them, and several people flock out to join the campaign of Yaqub al-Mansur. Meanwhile, Alfonso VIII seeks help from many of the Christian neighboring countries. He seeks out to Christendom to help him, beginning with those Christian kingdoms surrounding him, whether it's the Portuguese or Navarre or Leon or Aragon, and then going into that of France and what would be modern day Germany, and Italy at the time with the Pope, and several people come to his aid. Now, in the year 591, which is really the following year, these armies collide. Yaqub al-Mansur al-Muwaḥḥidī, and the reason we go by this name, Yaqub al-Mansur, and Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur, and we say al-Muwaḥḥidī at the end, is that we will come to learn in the following session that there is another amazing personality that comes later on with the same name, Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Mansur al-Marini. He belongs to the Marini type of dynasty. So this is to distinguish them. So Abu Yusuf Yaqub al-Muwaḥḥidī, he gets an army which is unprecedented, which boasts 200,000 soldiers strong. And the Christians arrive at this place known as Al-Arak with an army, according to the largest number documented, was double or more than double, was 500,000 soldiers strong, blessed by the Pope, and according to some numbers, which more skeptical numbers, an army which was at the very least 250,000 strong. Now, Yaqub al-Mansur, unlike his predecessors, was known for his shura, for taking advice from people. So he gathers the people around him and he takes advice on what to do. And they kind of instruct him, and he takes that advice and he implements it, and he comes up with a strategy which was very similar to that of Yusuf ibn Tashfin, where he splits the army into three different type of categories, where he has the Muwaḥḥidīn in one type of category, and the North Africans, and he has the Andalusian, and he has the Arabs in a separate type of, and he kind of sets it all up in a very similar type of tactic to that of Yusuf ibn Tashfin at the Battle of Zalaqa. The Christian attack which follows is incredibly heavy and forceful and fierce with its onslaught. It kind of comes down, they descend heavily upon the Muslim army. The Muslims do stand their ground. Yaqub al-Mansur is known to have sent messages, because he had such a large army, to each individual camp, telling people, reminding them to cleanse and clean their niyyah. And they kind of instruct him, and he takes that advice and he implements it, and he comes up with a strategy which was very similar to that of Yusuf ibn Tashfin, where he splits the army into three different type of categories, where he has the Muwaḥḥidīn, and he has the Andalusian, and he has the Arabs in a separate type of, and he kind of sets it all up in a very similar type of tactic to that of Yusuf ibn Tashfin at the Battle of Zallaqa. The Christian attack which follows is incredibly heavy and forceful and fierce with its onslaught. It kind of comes down, they descend heavily upon the Muslim army. The Muslims do stand their ground. Yaqub al-Mansur is known to have sent messages, because he had such a large army, to each individual camp, telling people, reminding them to cleanse and clean their niyyah, reminding them that this could be the last battle, this could be your last moment in this dunya, to kind of forgive each other, to see this as a victory no matter what, and reminding them to have ikhlas, sincerity of intention. And you see the flags rising, and the flags of the Muwaḥḥidīn were white flags with the Shahada written on them, La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, and also written beneath that, Wala ghaliba illallah, which also becomes the shi'ar, the motto, or the sign, the emblem really of the later dynasty in Al-Andalus. Now in that battle, eventually the Christian kingdoms crumble and collapse. They say Allahu Akbar, that there is such a victory that just on the first day, and it does last several days, 30,000 Christians meet their fate on the battlefield. That's just the first day. In total, they say 146,000 Christians meet their fate, fighting soldiers meet their fate on that battlefield. If you imagine the army just to consist of 250,000, that is much more than half of the entire army collapsing and crumbling. They say 20 to 30,000 soldiers were taken as prisoners of war, whom Yaqub al-Mansur actually forgives and sets free as a sign and to reflect the majesty of the Islamic rule of the Muwaḥḥid dynasty. They say that the Muslims on that day conquer so much ghanaim that it's almost uncountable. That 80,000 horses are taken as spoils of war, in addition to 100,000 mules. So much gold, silver, artillery, so many things are taken in by the Muslim armies that it is a huge success. And to really add nurun ala nur, this victory comes to the Muslim Ummah only 8 years after or following its sister victory in the east of Hittin, where Salahuddin al-Ayyubi had conquered the Quds in the east. And this is 8 years after that, the Battle of Arak people in 591 Hijri. A history to be remembered. Allahu Akbar. Yaqub al-Mansur then goes on and uses much of that money that is gained there to invest in Al-Andalus. He sets about creating one of the largest masjids in Seville, Ishbiliya. He creates the largest minaret, which in its day and age stands at 200 meters tall. He has an equal one built in Marrakesh, which still stands there today as the Qutubiyya. And there was an equal one in Seville, which perhaps remnants of today are around. And Remnants meaning it's not obviously, although that type of tower is around, but the masjid is not to be seen. And whatever was there of a masjid has been turned into a cathedral. With this in mind, Yaqub al-Mansur has the intention to unify the Muslim world. He knows of the victories that have taken place in Misr and in the Middle East, led by the Ayyubi dynasty, led by Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. And now Yaqub al-Mansur has one of the largest dynasties in the Muslim world. And he has this intention, and he sets about to kind of unify. There is speak of this, however, it does not materialize before anything can actually happen. There is a shocking event which takes place in 595 Hijri, in which Yaqub al-Mansur suddenly and unexpectedly died. Now, before he had actually died, many of the Christians had actually come to seek a treaty with him. The kingdoms of Navarre, Leon, Castile, even the King of England had sent gifts to Yaqub al-Mansur. That Castile had actually just embarked upon a new treaty for 10 years with the Almohad dynasty, in the same year which Yaqub al-Mansur then died. Now when he dies, he chooses his son to be in charge, somebody that becomes known as al-Nasir. Now al-Nasir, Lidinillah, was only 18 at the time when he was selected. Now 18 is not necessarily such a young age given the history of events that we've witnessed, like that of the conquest of Al-Andalus with Tariq ibn Ziyad only being 17 and many other people rising, and when we see Abdurrahman al-Nasir being a very young person but also rising to great power. However, Nasir Lidinillah was not of such caliber. He was a committed person. He was somebody that learnt much from his father. He was somebody that was committed to jihad and committed to his campaigns. He was committed to the cause and determined. However, he was not somebody that could fill the gap that had emerged with the death of his father. What also begins to happen is, with the death of his father, Bani Ghaniya begin to once again rebel in eastern Andalus. Now really Nasir begins to really immerse himself in extinguishing the rebellion of Bani Ghaniya. And he continues to do this for the next following past 8 to 9 years until he finally puts them out. But he spends much time and effort in having to battle with Bani Ghaniya in eastern Andalus. They really were and truly were a unique, not in a positive type of way, but they were an extraordinary kingdom that almost lasts for 20 years in rule. And what I would really term as misplaced effort and energy. Because had of that dynamism really united with the overall Muslim power, it would have taken the whole dynasty to new heights rather than having Muslim concentrate on Muslim. During this time, Alfonso VIII, who had faced such a tragic and humiliating defeat at the Battle of Arak in 591 Hijri, had taken several oaths. He had taken an oath that he would not do this and that he would not marry and he would not engage in any type of relationship with his type of wives or anything like this, or enjoy any aspect of life. And he even turned the crucifix on its head and said he would not set it straight until he does not have his revenge and avenge the death of all, avenge the tragedy of Al-Arak and the humiliation. There is also, however, there is also at this type of time worth mentioning a myth has it that the King John of England had fallen out with Pope Innocent III. And during this time, Pope Innocent had actually banned all forms of worship to take place in England and kind of almost excommunicated England, and even set about and had certain plans that England should be attacked and conquered by France. And with this in mind, King John sent some messengers to Al-Nasir li-Dinillah for their help, and had actually even said that he was prepared to become Muslim and have England be governed by Islam if they aided him. But Al-Nasir li-Dinillah rejected the plea for help. Allahu A'lam how true that is. I mean, some historians have documented it, and you can find it if you Google it. But Allahu A'lam with its truth. Another really weird type of event that takes place is how Al-Nasir li-Dinillah really takes as his confidant this person known as Abu Sa'id ibn Jami', who is one of his ministers who he really resorts to for advice. Now, Al-Nasir, unlike his actual father Yaqub al-Mansur, does not seek advice and counsel from the general advisory and from scholars and leadership. He's quite dictatorial, except he is quite influenced by this Abu Sa'id ibn Jami', who historians have really questioned the intentions and integrity of. Ibn Jami' was actually a Spaniard that had that his family had come to Islam, but he was somebody of Spanish descent, and really his intentions and integrities remain questionable at the very least. Now, with all this going on, and Nasir not really living up to the expectations of the dynasty, the Christians really see this as an opportunity to rise once again. They, this time, having learnt from their previous lessons, begin to amass an army that would be unprecedented almost. The Pope once again blesses the war. All of Europe partakes, including armies from as far as the Byzantium dynasty are sent. The Byzantines actually send and contribute to the army. France undertakes all expenses and all finances for the army, because France has a huge interest in seeing the decline of the Muslim rule in Spain, because obviously it is next on the borderline, so it has much to fear. Now, whilst all this was going on, Navarre, the Kingdom of Navarre, had a treaty with the Muwaḥḥidūn. Now, the Pope writes, most likely Pope Innocent III, writes to Navarre, the King of Navarre, and asks them to break their treaty with the Muwaḥḥidūn, and tells them that their treaty is tantamount to nothing, and that they are under obligation to unite with Castile, who eventually they do, and the army that is collected and assembled reaches a staggering 200,000 soldiers strong. And they now are getting themselves together, and Nasir li-Dinillah, whilst this is going on, and Nasir li-Dinillah also assembles an army. And remember, he gets such an army from North Africa and from Al-Andalus and from all these corners to collect and march. And do you know, people, how much or how many people he manages to assemble? At the very least, he assembles 250,000. At the very least. Other reports say 300,000. Some even take it up to 400,000. That he assembles an unprecedented Muslim army. Some have even said 500,000. Allahu Akbar. But at the very least, going with the most skeptical report to be found, that he takes an army which is 250,000 strong, and the report that says that the Christian army was 150,000. So it says that the difference was 100,000. Now, he gets this army and he crosses over into the Iberian Peninsula, and where he gets more reinforcements. And whilst they're there, he then heads to this fort, which is known as Salbatra. Now the thing is, this fort was something which was not incredibly important, but it was well fortified, outstandingly fortified. And he starts to lay siege, and they're there for weeks, and weeks turn into months, and they're trying to take over. Now he is advised by many of his leaders to leave this fort. It is insignificant, and to march north and meet the Christian armies who have been collected. And he refuses, because his wazir Ibn Jami tells him that no, you should really try and take this fort. And that was somebody who he remains incredibly convinced by. Now eventually, after several months, he decides to leave the fort without any success and march north. But you see, by this time, what had happened was he had given much time, months, to the Christian armies to reinforce, once again reassemble, to fortify themselves, to consolidate their efforts, to unify their strategies, and also be the onset of winter, which many of the Muslim armies were not prepared for. And see, the fact that the Muslim armies had continuously been fighting meant that they were worn out by the time they reached this place which is known as Al-Iqab. And Allahu Akbar. It is known as Al-Iqab because that is what the place was called. But كأنه, as though it is a sign. And Iqab in Arabic also means a punishment. And what happens to the Muslims there is as though a punishment befalls them. Wallahu a'lam. We see that the Christians set aside their strategy, where they have a tripartite strategy, where they have the Europeans in one whole army, they have the armies of Aragon in the second, third, and all the other Christians, that is of France, of England, of what would have been Germany, as the third. Now what happens is, you see, whilst the Christian armies were waiting there are certain forts which they begin to attack. Now there is this one fort, and this is now the year is 609 Hijri, and yet Nasir al-Din-Allah is on his way. He hasn't actually made it here yet, but he's on his way with his army. There is a person who is a commander of the Muslims within that fort, known as Abu al-Hajjaj Yusuf ibn Qadis. Now Abu al-Hajjaj Yusuf ibn Qadis, he is facing Alfonso VIII. Now what happens is he realizes there's no way they can stand their ground and fight off these people. So he eventually, after resisting for several days, sends out a truce. He says to Alfonso VIII that, look, if Alfonso VIII allows him and his men and the people there to leave this fort and retreat, then they are happy to do so. Now Alfonso sees that as a unique opportunity and agrees. So he takes over this fort, and Abu al-Hajjaj ibn Qadis retreats. Now here the Europeans, the other 1/3 of the army, has a huge dispute with Alfonso VIII. They say, look, we've come from so far and wide to fight the Muslims. There is no way on earth you can let them just go like that. They need to be executed. And this quarrel turned so bitter. You see, the reason Alfonso VIII didn't want to kind of execute them was because he knew that yet the Christians were going to descend further south, and news would spread like wildfire. So if he agreed to certain treaties that the Muslims, and the truces that the Muslims would spread, when they surround and lay siege to further fortresses in the south, Muslims would believe that Alfonso is a man of his word, and they would therefore submit to him. So he has this type of strategy going on in his mind. However, the European allies don't really care about much of Alfonso's internal strategies. They realize that they've come from so far and wide to fight and execute Muslims, and that is what should be happening. Now, this turns so sour that the entire European army that had come to assist him retreats and falls away. Allahu Akbar. People say almost 50,000 soldiers retreated. So this is another blow, a massive strike really to the army of Alfonso before the battle has even commenced. Now, whilst this is going on, from Abu al-Hajjaj ibn Qadis, who had retreated from what was Qal'a al-Raba', and he returns and meets al-Nasir li-Dinillah, who's coming with this army, and they've set up camp. Now he retreats with his people. Now at this place, Ibn Jami', the minister, advises al-Nasir li-Dinillah that, you know what, this is actually treachery and treason. This person having left this fort and run away. Now Abu al-Hajjaj says, look, I didn't run away. There was no way we could have stood our ground. I've simply come to reunite with the Muslim reinforcements and go back. But no, Ibn Jami' kind of gets his way, and he convinces al-Nasir li-Dinillah that this person needs to be punished, and they have him executed in front of the entire Muslim army that was there. Now this type of attitude and approach is unprecedented for the Andalusians, who make up a huge part of al-Nasir's army. Now don't forget that Abu al-Hajjaj is an Andalusi, and he's a leader, and he's being executed for really, not for cowardice in reality, but just for a different strategy. And even if his strategy was wrong, I mean, you don't kill the person. How far is this from the Sunnah and the Seerah of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who dealt with people, and even when they had erred and taken what were genuine mistakes, had made genuine mistakes, how he dealt with them. And even those leaders and umara who followed in the footsteps of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam within this Iberian Peninsula. If we recall the story of Abdurrahman al-Nasir, when he went to the Tajibiyin that had rebelled and kind of taken an allegiance with the Christians, and then when he conquers them, he puts them back in charge, Allahu Akbar, thereby winning the heart of the Tajibiyin. And if you remember, they were a people that remained very loyal to the Umayyin after that. Now look how far we have come from the approach of Abdurrahman al-Nasir. That slaughtering, killing your own people in front of your army. These type of mistakes are tragic and change the course of history. Now what you start to see after that is al-Nasir li-Dinillah, he gets his army, and he approaches to what is this place known as Al-Iqab. And this place is such a tragedy for the Muslims. Such a tragedy. So many, they say that the Muslims, and we must remember that the Andalusian were already disheartened with the actions of al-Nasir. That 70,000 Andalusian die, because they were at the kind of forefront. Many of them die on the battlefield, and many other thousands flee from the battlefield. Another huge strategic mistake that Nasir had done was that he had split his army into those which were the voluntary army and those which were his military, the Muwaḥḥidīn soldiers. And he had made the voluntary soldiers go first, which was such a huge mistake. And they were they were thousands and thousands. We're talking almost perhaps 100,000 He had set them to be first. Now, because they were not as skilled as their Christian adversaries, the Christians sliced through them, which raised the morale and confidence of the Christian armies, and it absolutely plunged the Muslim army into a state of fear and disarray and confusion. So this type of strategy was absolutely tragic. Eventually, the Almohad army flees whatever is remaining from them after having thousands and over 70,000 of them dying on the battlefield, including Nasir. He flees, and then he makes a further mistake. He doesn't just flee from that battlefield and go and take refuge he just flees from the neighboring cities altogether. And you're forgetting that the Christians are in such a state of glory and victory that they continue their attacks further south, that they go to Bayasa, which is a neighboring city, and they take that over. They go to Ubada, which they lay siege for 13 days, and it was a city known for its hospitals and its medicine, that they take over, and the priests advise that everybody that is capable of fighting be killed, and 60,000 people are killed on that day. And the Christians begin to expand, and Nasir retreats to North Africa in much humiliation, only to die within a year. And he selects, Allahu Akbar, and he selects as his heir his son, who is known as al-Mustansir. And al-Mustansir is only 11 years old at the time. Allahu Akbar. As though we see history repeating itself. If you remember Al-Hakam, who was at such a legacy, such a state of the Umayyad dynasty when it had reached its peak, makes the mistake of choosing his son, who's only 11, 12 years of age, Hisham at the time. And then we see such a great dynasty falling to destruction and just fragments and fractions by such a choice. And we see that returning now with us once again, that An-Nasir Lidinillah chooses Al-Mustansir, who is only 11 years of age. Now, the Christian armies which were advancing south, by perhaps divine intervention, many of the armies are struck with disease and illness, that it kind of shakes the entire army, that they have to stop and retreat and go back north to their strongholds, which once again gives the Muslims a moment to breathe and collect themselves, and perhaps gives them some further respite to kind of cultivate whatever they have of their civilization. Now, during this type of time, in 614 Hijri, in the north of Maghrib, there is a rebellion from the tribe of Zanata, which is the same tribe which Abdul Mu'min ibn Ali was from. And we see this rebellion is led by these people known as Bani Marine, who will go on later on, we will see in the next session, to play a major role in Al-Andalus and Al-Maghrib. In the following years, in 620 Al-Hijri, the Balearic Islands are taken over by the Kingdom of Aragon, which is aided by Italy. Up to 20,000 people are killed. We see that Tunis has an independent rebellion and is taken over by Banu Hafs, a tribe which take over. In that year, 620 Hijri, Al-Mustansir, at the age of 21, dies, and is followed by his father's uncle, known as Abdul-Wahid, who is then killed, and followed by Abdullah, Adil, and then the whole kingdom is unstable and absolutely volatile. Within the following years, we start to see in 625 Al-Hijri, East and South Al-Andalus are really taken over by a person known as Ibn Hud, who the historians write is unsuccessful in every attack he launches against the Christian empire. In 633 Hijri, Bani Zayyan declare independence in what is the Algeria or Jazair region. In 633, and people, this is a date to really lament over. On the 23rd of Shawwal, Cordoba crumbles and collapses to the hands of the Christian empire. Ferdinand, I believe it is the third, who takes over. He does, although he kind of refuses to kill people, and he does kind of make a treaty with them, really just out of fear. The historians write that the people of Cordoba would have destroyed much of the artifacts and much of the architecture that they had, which he was so fond of. So in place of that, he has this treaty with them. And that really seriously is such a loss. Cordoba, the same capital which had boasted its glory for over 500 years upon Europe, the same capital from which had hailed some of the greatest legends like Abdul Malik ibn Habib al-Maliki, Yahya ibn Yahya al-Laythi, Baqi ibn Makhlad, the major Hafiz of Hadith, Ibn Abd al-Bar, Abu al-Walid al-Baji, Ibn Hazm, so on and so forth. All these major legends, Ibn Rushd, all of these dons had emerged. That city finally crumbled. Allahu Akbar. May Allah return to it its lost glory. Ameen. But it really is a tragedy. And this is where you see the poem that لكل شيء إذا ما تم نقصانه فلا يغر بطيب العيش. That everything, once it reaches its peak, can only become destroyed. Can only really, the only way now is to back down. So humans should not be misguided by good fortune. That هي الأمور كما شاهدتها دول. That this is the world as you witness it. It revolves, it goes round. What goes round comes round. من سره زمن ساءته أزمان. Whosoever is pleased by a particular age is unfortunately displeased by much more of what follows. And that is that هل أتاك, the poet says, هل أتاك نبأ أهل أندلس فقد سرى بحديث القوم ركبان. That what have you actually come to hear of Al-Andalus? That indeed the people have traveled with its tale. This, we see that when it happens, 50,000 people are forced to migrate from a neighboring city, which is in Al-Andalus in the east, Valencia, because what's actually happened is the Christian kingdoms could not believe what they had conquered, and this just once again gave much more determination. So they begin their onslaught and their attacks in 636. Valencia collapses after a 5-year siege in which the situation had become dire, and it collapses to the Kingdom of Aragon. Banu Hafs from Tunis do attempt to help, but the siege was so fortified that it was impossible. When Valencia crumbles, 50,000 people are forced to migrate, and they migrate to Tunis. And this was really a simple policy that many of the Christian kingdoms had. Whenever they took over, it was a method of ethnic cleansing. They would either kill or they would forced migration to basically clean the newly founded cities from any Muslim or Islamic heritage. In the following years, in 641, Dania collapses, and then Jiyan. Allahu Akbar. We begin to see really all of what is left is Gharnata, which is a kingdom in the south, which is under the control of a person known as Ibn al-Ahmar, who we'll begin to hear more of. And then Ishbiliya, Seville, really, which is controlled by Ibn Hud. That is all that remains of this glorious legacy within the Iberian Peninsula. Allahu Akbar. Yet, despite that, biqudratillah, by the decree of Allah, that fate had decided that these people would still, that these small and remnants of Muslim existence would still celebrate a certain respite that would allow their civilization to blossom for the next 2.5 centuries, to produce some of the most legendary ulama that this ummah has ever seen, the likes of Ash-Shatibi, the likes of Ibn al-Khatib, the likes of you will see Ibn Asim and many others. All of these people, Ibn al-Mawwaq, Ibn al-Lub, and so on, producing some legends that Allahu Akbar, and then finally for the sun to finally set upon this empire, upon this dynasty, and what takes place and what leads up to, first of all, this 2.5 centuries of further blossoming of civilization, and then what is it that finally causes this dynasty or the crescent upon this peninsula to crumble, is what we will take a look at in the following session. Jazakumullah khair for listening attentively. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. And do remember me in your humble du'as. Wassalamu alaikum.